Okay, so today we are going to look at situations when we are factoring polynomials and our C value is negative. So here's an example where we have a trinomial and our C value, this value, is negative. So the first thing we should think about is, remember that this, let's turn that around, that this value is produced because it's a product of two numbers. We remember that if we multiply when the signs are the same, that's horrible too right there. When the signs are the same, what do we know about that third value? That it's a product of these two, that would end up being positive 12. And the other part would be, and that this is a product of two numbers. It's the last, it's a product of the lasts, and that this is the sum of the outside and inside, of the outside and the inside. That would be 2x plus 6x. And since these signs are the same, we know that the outside and the inside are going to have the same signs. That's positive 2x and positive 6x. So of course we're going to get a bigger positive. So when we look at this trinomial, we look at this and we go, oh, the signs are the same and they're both positive. When we have a situation like this, we know that produces x squared minus 7x plus 12. Again, we know that since this sign is positive, the signs must be the same because this is a product. The only way you can get a product, a multiplication, and that produces a positive number is if they're both negative or both positive. In this case, they're both negative. Negative 3 times negative 4 gives me positive. When we had this one, we had positive 6 times positive 2 gave me positive 12. So when this sign is positive, we know that those lasts have to be, or the signs have to be the same. And then we look here to see that they're both negative because we have negative 4x and negative 3x. So let's look, and when would this second sign be negative? What would produce a negative? Well, let's look at an example. X minus 10, x plus 4. So that would produce x squared minus 6x minus 40. And the reason why this is negative, because we multiplied a negative 10 times a positive 4. We notice that the signs are different. The only way you get a negative through a product is if one is positive and one is negative. Now here's my outside and inside. Remember, this is still the combination of the outside and the inside, where we have negative 10x and positive 4x. So we know that one's going to be negative and one's going to be positive. And since we have more negatives than positive, my remainder is going to be negative. So I can look here and understand that of my outside and inside, that my bigger one is going to be negative. So I have two numbers that are going to have opposite signs, and when I combine them, it's going to produce a negative 6. So I know if we have two numbers that the bigger of those two numbers will be negative. If we had something that looked like this, that would produce x squared plus 5x minus 14. Again, notice that this second sign is negative, and that tells me that my signs are different. Since this is positive, I know that I have more positives than negatives. More positives. I had positive 7x minus 2x. I have more positives than negatives. I got 7 positives and 2 negatives. So I'm going to have leftovers of positives. So let's go back here. So we know that. right? And remember, the first thing that we need to do anyway in this procedure is we ask, is this the difference of squares? No, because difference of squares only has two terms. Is this a binomial square? All right, well, it has three terms, like all binomial squares do. However, second sign is always positive in a binomial square, and the second sign here is negative. So we know it's not a binomial square special case. So we're going to do A times C. My A value is 1. Where is my A value? Remember, my A value is going to be the coefficient of x squared. That's always going to be my A value. And my C value is going to be my constant. So in this case, my constant is negative 15. And we're going to multiply those. 1 times negative 15 gives me negative 15. Now I'm going to find factors of 15. Why not negative 15? Because we're going to hold off. We don't know which one of these 1 or 15, is going to get the negative and which one's going to get the positive. 3 and 5. So I know that one of them has to be negative because that's the only way these two numbers multiplied makes negative 15. So which one is going to get the negative? Is the smaller number going to get the negative, or is the bigger number going to get the negative? So we look here, we know my signs are different because that's the only way you can get a negative through a product. And this tells me that I have more positives. So the bigger of these two numbers has to be positive. And that means the other one is negative because the signs have to be different. We can look at 3 and 5, my factor pairs. 5 is bigger than 3, so the bigger has to get positive, the smaller gets negative. And we notice that what my answer ends up being positive, because I see that the sum of those two is going to produce a positive 2. So 5 has to be positive. So which one's equal to my middle? That's negative 3 and positive 5. So I'm going to rewrite this. I'm going to pull down my x squared. That comes down. I'm going to rewrite my middle term with my two values, my factor pairs. And then I'm going to pull down my last. So I'm just rewriting this with a new middle. I'm just breaking the middle. Now we factor by grouping. We group the first two, we group the second two. So if I look at the first two, what number or variable goes into both of those? Both of them have an x. So if I factor out an x, I'm left with x minus 3. I look at my second pairing. A 5 can be divided into both of those. And that leaves me with x minus 3. I know I did it right because these two parentheses are the same. So I'm going to factor out the x minus 3, and that leaves me with x plus 5. Let's do another one. So again, difference of squares? No. Binomial square? No. A times C. A is 1, C is negative 5. We get negative 5. Factors of 5 are 1 and 5. I look here. That's a negative, so I know that my signs are different. And then I look here, and I know that the bigger is going to get the positive. So 5 gets the positive, 1 gets negative. That gives me 4. That's equal to my middle value. I'm going to break v squared minus v. Notice I didn't write minus 1v. Plus 5v minus 5. I got these two numbers from here, negative 1 and positive 5. And I just used the variable of the middle. I look at the first two. What do they have in common? They don't have a coefficient, but they have a variable. So if I divide it by v, I get v minus 1. And that's where it's tricky. If we divide v squared by v, that leaves me with a v. If I divide negative v by v, I get negative 1. The v over v gives me 1, and the negative gives me a negative. Let's group the second two. I can factor out a positive 5. That leaves me with v minus 1. V minus 1 times the quantity v plus 5. So let's take a second, pause the video, see if you can do this one. When you're done, let's push play and you can check your work against my work. All right, so the answer to this, it is not the difference of squares because there are 3 terms. It's not a binomial square because the second term is negative. So I'm going to use the A times C technique. A is 1, C is negative 10. 1 times negative 10 is negative 10. Factors of negative 10 are 1 and 10, 2 and 5. I look here to find if the signs are different. So I know that they're different, and this time the bigger of the 2 is negative. So 10 is bigger than 1, so 10 is negative, 1 is positive. And remember, what's positive 1 times negative 10? That gives us that. So these 2 factor pairs, when multiplied, are going to give me this, and when added are going to give me this. That's what we're working off of. Unfortunately, let's go like that. So bigger is negative, bigger is negative. That gives me negative 9. This gives me negative 3. This is equal to my middle. So we get m squared plus 2m minus 5m minus 10. Let's group. I'm going to look at the first 2. I can factor out an m. I get m plus 2. Let's look at the second 2. This is the first one. Hey, notice my first term is negative. So I need to factor out a negative. I'm going to factor out a negative 5. Notice my first term was positive. I factored out a positive 5. So whatever that first term is what sign I'm going to factor out. First term negative, factor out a negative. So that leaves me with m plus 2. They both have m plus 2, and that gives me m plus 5. And that would be my answer. Again, let's try this. Pause the video. Take an opportunity to do this. Practice it. And then when you're ready, push play, and I'll explain it, and you can check your work against mine. This is not the difference of squares. It is not a binomial square. So we will use A times C technique. A is 1, C is negative 8. 1 times negative 8 is negative 8. Factors of 8 are 1 and 8, 2 and 4. Signs are different. And the bigger of the 2 numbers will be negative. And the smallers will be positives. Negative 7, negative 2. We end up with that. That gives me n squared plus 2n minus 4n minus 8. Factor by grouping. We're going to factor out an n. We're going to factor out a negative 4. We get n plus 2, n minus 4. Excellent. All right, let's try this one. What do we notice that's different about this one? Take a gander, take a look at this. What's different about this than the first 4 that we did? Hopefully you said, hey, A is 3, so it's greater than 1. Doesn't change our process. We still ask, is it difference of squares? No. Is it a binomial square? No. So let's do A times C. This time A is 3. C is negative 20. 3 times negative 20 is negative 60. So what do we notice when A is greater than 1? We just end up with a bigger number that we have to find factor pairs of. That's all. Nothing different. The only difference is you're going to have a couple more factor pairs. Factors of 60 are 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 5 and 12, and 6 and 10. Signs are different, and the bigger is positive. Negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive. 59, 28, 17, 11, 7, 4. There's my middle. So I break that in, 3n squared minus 4n plus 15n minus 20. Let's group them. Factor out an n. They don't have a coefficient in common, so we can just take out only a variable. That leaves me 3n minus 4. This time they do have a coefficient in common, positive 5. And that leaves me with 3n minus 4. We're dividing 5 into 15n and dividing 5 into negative 20. 3n minus 4 times the quantity n plus 5 would be my answer. So last one, let's try this one. Let's do this one. Okay, let's do. So pause the video, take a moment, do the work, come up with a solution. When you're ready, push play, and we'll go over it. So, not the difference of squares, not a binomial square. A times C. 3 is A, negative 20 is C. Oh, negative 60 again. How interesting is that? All right, so 1 and 60, we're comfortable with that. 2 and 30, we know that. 3 and 20. 4 and 15, 5 and 12, 6 and 10. Signs are different, but this time the bigger gets the negative. So negative, 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 and positive. We don't have to necessarily, we could have just understood. That's negative 59. That's negative 28. That's negative 17. Negative 11, negative 7, negative 4. This is my middle this time. So we get 3n squared plus 5n minus 12n minus 20. Group them up. We again can only take an n from here. That leaves me with 3n plus 5. My first term is negative, so I got to factor out a negative 4, which gives me 3n plus 5. And my answer is 3n plus 5, n minus 4. Hopefully this all makes sense. Come and see me if you don't and you have some questions. Good luck.